Vostok is well known for their two lines of ultra-affordable mechanical watches, which is the mechanical Komandierski Field Watch and the automatic Amphibia Dive Watch. But those aren't the only two watches in Vostok's collection. And if you're someone that wants to add a Russian watch to yours, but say are concerned about some of the unique quirks of classic Vostok, then you should take a look at their other line of field and dive watches, which is the Komandierski and Amphibias. And while they share the same movements, they have a much more modern design and feel. Now I know that sounds confusing, but I'm talking about the Komandierski automatics and the Amphibias with an F. I guess Vostok knows they have a well-known brand, so they just decided to run with it. But out of those watches, the one that I found the most interesting is this one, which is the Amphibia Scuba, which I think combines the ruggedness that Vostok is known for in a modern compressor style case. Picking up the Scuba, you immediately noticed it feels like a nice, hefty piece of solid steel. It has a cushion-style case with a little bit of an industrial vibe to it, which is apparent from the angles, brushed finish, as well as the bolts on top. The case is 41mm wide without the crown, but only 44.5 width, since the crowns come out at an angle. Lug to lug, it's also a little short at 48mm. It's also a bit tall at 15mm, while it uses 20mm straps. It also weighs a good 116 grams. Overall, the case is a tight, smaller package compared to a lot of divers these days, but it's one that still manages to have quite a presence on the wrist. Even with all the angles this case has, the finishing is quite good. The only area that feels a little rough is the case back, but that's by design. Unlike regular Amphibias, this one's crystal is mineral glass, so it will offer a little bit better scratch resistance. Yet it still maintains a little bit of a dome shape, but one that's nowhere near as tall. There are 3 versions of the Scuba, all with various color schemes, but this one is a flat white on the dial, as well as on the bezel. The hour indicators are applied, and also in white, but with a black outline. The minute indicators, as well as the indicators on the bezel, are painted on in black. The black and white color scheme give it a sharp contrast, which makes the watch very easy to use, which is followed up by the partially skeletonized hands, which make the orange second hand stand out even more as it dramatically circles the dial. Below the hands, you also have the phrase Scuba and 200 meters in that same matching orange. At the 3, you have an open date window, which I know some will hate. Now normally, I just don't care too much about them, but in this instance, I think it's done right. The date is in a flat black with white text, but that black background adds to the color scheme and also gives the dial some depth. The extra 2 dates are partially obscured from the dial flaring out over them, so there is never any confusion as to what date it actually is. So instead of being a distraction like on so many other dials, I think this one really adds to the design. Also, at the bottom of the dial, you have the phrase "Made in Russia," but in English. Something you don't really see that often, and may tell you what market this watch is really intended for. Now, I've seen some speculation that the newer Vostoks are only assembled in Russia, and some of the parts are sourced elsewhere, like China, which at this point is just like every other manufacturer. Regardless, the result is great, and it really feels well made. There are 2 screw-down crowns on the right of the watch, one about 210 and the other closer to 345. The top crown is signed with the Amphibia logo, which appears to be a shield with waves. This is the crown for the movement. Like most Vostoks, the watch is hand-windable, but not hackable. But unlike most Vostoks, the crown here isn't wobbly. In fact, this one has a very solid feel to it as you wind it. Now, the lower crown controls the internal bezel, and it also has a nice, solid, responsive feel to it, which makes setting the bezel very easy. Now, as you move to the back of the watch, you can see the case back, which unlike the original Amphibias, this is a regular screw-down closed case back, with the Amphibia logo etched on it. Interestingly, there is no mention of movement, model, or serial number. Now, the biggest disappointment with the Scuba is the Loom, which is listed as Super Luminova, which it might actually be, but if it is, there's not a lot of it. The Loom isn't that bad, it's just nowhere near what I was hoping for. In fact, I don't think it's much brighter than a regular Amphibia, and it only lasts just as long. The movement is a standard Vostok 2416B, so it will have a slower beat and no quick set date, as well as a shorter 30-hour power reserve. Now, accuracy from Vostok coming out of the factory can be hit or miss. In this case, it's okay-ish. It gains about 15 seconds a day, which I would prefer it if it was closer to 20. But it is still within spec, as well as it should be easy to regulate when I actually get around to opening her up. The Vostoks also have a reputation for having bad straps, but this one is different and comes with a very soft silicone black strap. It has the Amphibia name and logo on it, as well as a very nicely sized signed buckle. Now, the strap is very, very soft, which makes it a little bit floppy, but it also makes it very comfortable to wear. In fact, I've been primarily wearing it on that strap, and I can say that it's quite good. The only problem you may have is if you have smaller wrists. The Amphibia name on the strap takes up space where there are normally holes for smaller wrists. So for me, with my 7-inch wrist, I actually have it on the second hole. So any smaller, and you may have a problem. But with that strap, the watch wears very well. It's not too wide or too long, and just seems to hug my wrist perfectly. My only concern is that I think it's a little tall, but it's not really any taller than a regular Amphibia. It's just here, most of that height is steel case instead of lucite. When I ordered this Scuba a few months ago, the price was dropping a bit, but most online sellers still had them in stock. But looking today, the supply seems to have dried up. So I don't know if they've been discontinued or just temporarily out of stock. Now, one of the problems I see with the new model Vostoks is getting the appeal across to the consumers. And I think there are hurdles to overcome for both Vostok fans and newcomers to the brand. Now, around $160, there are a lot of good watches, and specifically a lot of good Seikos, such as a Seiko SKX, or even an Orient Ray or Mako. So trying to convince someone to spend that much from a vendor overseas that they've never heard of is a little bit of a hard sell, let alone telling them that they have to wait a month. And I think this also applies to even Vostok fans, who may be used to spending $30 to $60 a pop for a Commandeersky or an Amphibia. It's a bit of a price increase, and some of them may not be willing to risk it. But I think the bigger issue for some of the fans is that these models also lack the history and heritage that the originals offer. So ideally, they need to find someone who has experience with Vostoks, but is willing to take a risk and spend a little bit more, just to get something unique. And in my case, I'm glad I did, and I'm very curious to see what other lesser-known Vostoks are like. Now, while the Loom is disappointing, it's really the only complaint I have against the watch. The rest is great, and I really hope they aren't discontinued and they start to come back in stock. So if you are interested, keep an eye out. In the meantime, let me know in the comments what you think about the Scuba, as well as if you think of any other Vostoks I should check out. And as always, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Thanks for joining me, and until next time.